under the bed?
There's nothing under the bed, Mum.
Will you check for me?
First of all, Natalie, I'm Carmen from Donde Ir magazine. It's a city guide from Mexico City. And I would like to thank you for your time and congratulate for your movie. I mean, I think it's one of my favorites from 2020. And I would like to start asking you, the basics. Where does the inspiration for Relic comes from?
Yeah, the inspiration came from personal experience for sure. My grandmother had Alzheimer's for a number of years, and I actually started writing it on a trip that I took to go visit her in Japan. And unfortunately, in the time between when I'd last seen her, she'd forgotten, she couldn't remember who I was. And so I think I was grappling with a lot of feelings of guilt about not going to see her more often. And at the same time, she lived in this house that had always really scared me as a kid. It's this kind of traditional Japanese house I'd spent all my summers in. And at nighttime, it would just freak me out. So I think those two things kind of came together. And that was the starting point.
When was the last time you spoke to her?
It's been a few weeks.
Gran? Mom?
Mom! She called me a few weeks ago. I think she was scared. She thought someone was coming into the house.
Since you conceived the idea in the script, did you know that you wanted 3 women to star the movie?
Actually, originally it was 2 siblings, I think. I think my co-writer and I were closer in age to the youngest character, Sam. And so originally the perspective was from their kind of view of the family dynamic. But over time, the relationships between the mother, daughter, and grandmother were the ones that kind of shone through. And we felt it was cleaner in a way, but also had a really, let's say, poetic kind of unity, and the idea that of cycles and, the person who gives you birth, and your future kind of reflected in your mother and your mother's mother. So that in the end, aesthetically and thematically, was more in line with what I wanted to say.
Tea?
How did you decide that this should be the story for your first movie? I mean, it must be difficult to relive certain aspects of that time when creating Relic.
Yeah, I suppose I always see filmmaking as a way of, processing your world. And I guess like a lot of artists, you inevitably find that your pain or your life, becomes present in your work. So it can be tricky, I think, particularly in the writing process. There were moments that were difficult and that feel confronting. And on set, for sure, I had maybe like a couple scenes where I was just sobbing behind the monitor, and so that's hard. But I think it also means that you hopefully are hitting on something that's truthful, and I think that's the best you can do with any art form, really, just to try and be emotionally honest. So it takes its toll, but it's also kind of rewarding in a sense, because it feels like it matters, right? And otherwise, why make a film?
Do you know where you were, Mum?
I suppose I went out.
What's this?
I was on the property when your grandfather inherited it.
How hard, talking about the topic now about Relic, how hard was it to show dementia and this kind of loss in life as a situation of a horror movie?
Yeah, it's I think our approach was always to try and capture the essence of the experience as opposed to speak directly to, a more social realist approach. I mean, obviously, because it's pushed to such a supernatural extreme. But I think for us, it was more about hitting the emotion rather than, the day-to-day kind of realities. I think we draw on some of those things, and certainly some of the moments in the film are drawn from real life experience as well as, research that we did, my co-writer and I. But yeah, I think you have to, if you think about the film, it takes place over a week, and his decline is so fast. Whereas for me, it was a matter of, 10 years that my grandmother was declining. So it's again about capturing the essence of, that kind of terror as opposed to the kind of literal truth. Yeah.
Everything all right, Grant?
I thought this was where it got in.
Who? Whoever was coming into the house.
For me, the house itself is another character. And I would like to know if you, when you were designing the house, were you thinking in your grandmother's house? Because it's kind of a labyrinth.
Yeah, well, not so much in the architectural language, because my grandmother's house was in Japan, so it was very traditional Japanese architecture, but it's certainly in the cluttered spaces, because she had a couple rooms upstairs that were just full of stuff. And I remember the kind of sense of, actually the first image that came to mind of the film was the idea that this cluttered space, which to me was almost like a hoarding of her memories, that it would be almost growing inwards in this infinite kind of stretch of, a maze of sorts. And yeah, I was really attached to the idea that it was definitely emblematic of her memories, but again, taking something familiar and, warping it into something that was deeply unfamiliar and uncanny, much like the experience of the Alzheimer's.
As you said before, the horror as a genre usually faces many challenges. So what would you say was the biggest challenge you had to face with Relic?
For me, specifically in terms of genre, I always feel like mythology is really tricky. And it's tricky because it's hard to do without it being very expositional. And to kind of weave it into the story in a way that feels very natural is a challenge. For me, I prefer a more ambiguous approach. Like, personally, I don't really need to know why the supernatural mold exists, but we had to build in this backstory of the neglected family member who, was abandoned in this cabin, and the idea of that spreading to the house. And I think that's, it functions and it's fine and it's thematically linked, so I'm happy with that. But it's a tricky thing to convey without it feeling heavy-handed.
It's here. Under the bed.
No, there's nothing under the bed, Mum.
Are you sure? Will you check for me?
I know that you have previously worked in horror short movie films. So I assume, and you said before, that you are a horror fan. So there must be certain movies that have influenced you or that have shaped on you and the way that you are now a filmmaker? Could you tell me about this kind of horror that influences you, and if you have a special titles or names that you remember as the favorite ones?
Yeah, definitely. I think I mentioned Asian horror a lot. So, you know, a lot of the kind of classic late 90s, early noughties films. I think Kurosawa Kiyoshi, his film Pulse, that's still, or Cairo, that's still one of my favorites, I would say. But also like The Ring, the original Ring as well. Audition, Takashi Miike. I was also a really big fan, it's not like explicitly genre, but a massive David Lynch fan growing up. Tarkovsky as well. I think both filmmakers have a sense of or something other, you know, and they capture uncanniness and mood and dark atmosphere really well. I also loved Cronenberg as well growing up. So a lot of his kind of body horror elements, and particularly when it's paired with emotion, I think that had a massive influence on me as well. What else? I always, for Relic, I always really pointed to The Orphanage as like a great tonal reference, because it did kind of balance drama and horror, and that, you know, central kind of protagonist and her relationship with a child. That was something that really influenced me.
I know we are facing a hard time, and a lot of people are seeing Relic on streaming and on their computers in their houses. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I guess thinking back to mid last year, our US distributor released Relic online, but also in drive-in theaters. And I remember at the time feeling quite a little bit deflated, because of course it's always the dream to have, you know, people watch your film in a cinema, and especially for horror when it's, the darkness is so important, and the sound system, and, you know, that communal kind of experience makes a difference with horror. So there was some kind of disappointment, but in actual fact, I feel very lucky, because I feel like more people saw it because it was online and everyone was at home. There was a lot of films being pushed back at the time when we released in the US, so it probably got more attention than it would have in a normal year. In Australia, for example, this is so nerdy, but we got bought by a streamer here, even though we were originally supposed to, you know, release theatrically. And so our equivalent of Times Square in Melbourne was all just, you know, Relic posters everywhere. And the streamer was really aggressive with their marketing campaign. So there was a little bit of a thrill from that. You know, that's kind of like the icing on the cake in terms of filmmaking. But so I certainly have been very fortunate, despite everything that's happened.
Under the bed.
There's nothing under the bed, Mum.
Will you check for me?
Okay, I gotta tell you that seeing here in my house was kind of creepy, because I was thinking in my house like in Relic.
Oh, right. Yeah, it's like watching Paranormal Activity at home or something. Yeah.
I cannot wait to see it. Thank you
great.
so much for your time.
Thank you.
I can see you. Ah!